we've had or read the news, basically there have been lots of stories around cost of living, but particularly on inflation. And some of you may have heard that inflation has gone down. Now, at the Institute of Economic Affairs, which is a think tank that promotes debate and dialogue in public policy, we have a tool, and also through our website, we receive questions every now and then. And one of those questions that has been posed is on inflation, or is about inflation in Kenya. And so what this program that is hosting us today, Popular Economics, which is one of the 6 programs within the Institute of Economic Affairs, what the program has done is basically to sample some of those questions that have been posted by various people who visited our website about inflation. And so what they will be doing is to unpack what inflation is the importance of inflation, how to interpret inflation numbers or graphs that are presented, particularly by KNBS or in other government reports. And ultimately, we hope that at the end of this webinar, of course, through the presentation that will be made by 2 program officers, Vivian Ochola, Maureen Baraza, who both work in the Popular Economics. And this program is headed by Kwame Owino, our Chief Executive. So the 2 will take us through those responses to those questions, basically breaking down what inflation is and the importance of inflation. And ultimately, we hope that by the end of this, you will be able to, will have managed to raise your literacy on the concept of inflation and your understanding of inflation. Yeah, so that's what the 2 presenters will be taking us through. And so, following the usual drill of webinars that the IEA host, what we'll do, I'll give them an opportunity to take us through or to make the presentation. And then thereafter, we will open it up for a question and answer session. So of course, as the presentation goes on, feel free to jot down whatever questions or comments that you may have in the chat box. Of course, we'll go through those questions during that plenary session. But just to note, of course, after the Q&A, we have 3 questions. So we have a poll, and we'll post 3 questions. That is after the Q&A session. So please don't leave once we are done with the Q&A. And so the idea of this question is to use them as feedback and basically just to gauge your understanding of inflation based on the stuff, on the issues that will be tackled by, presented by the two speakers. So please look out for that. So without further ado, I can already see that the presentation is up on the screen.
Okay, thank you very much, John. I'll go straight to the questions. The first question is, what is inflation? So inflation is the increase in the general price level for goods and services in a country over a specific period of time, usually 1 year. This is the definition according to the Central Bank of Kenya. So we are noting there that inflation is the increase in general prices. It is not a single good or service, but it is the increase in the general level of prices of goods and services. Then we have how it is measured, the method that is used to measure inflation. And what is used is the CPI, which is the Consumer Price Index. This fundamentally tracks the average change over time in the prices paid by all consumers for a market basket of goods and services. So this is the definition according to the KNBS. So CPI basically tracks the average changes over time in the prices that are paid by all consumers for a market basket of goods. So it is also for a basket of goods, not as an individual good. Then we have inflation rate. So CPI is basically an index. So it has got no unit. We'll come to see more of it later. Then inflation rate is the percentage change of the CPI between two periods, basically a year-on-year basis, quarterly or monthly inflation rates according to the KNBS. Yeah. Next. How is inflation measured? So we have seen the definition of inflation. Now we are going into the second question on how it is measured. So it is measured by tracking the changes in prices of a basket of goods and services commonly purchased by households, primarily using the consumer price index. So another thing we are noting here is that it tracks the changes in prices of basket of goods that are commonly purchased. So the goods that are tracked, they are goods that are commonly purchased by households within, primarily using the consumer price index. Yeah, question. Next. Now, we have identified what inflation is, how it is measured, and we want to see question 3, how is Kenya CPI basket constructed? How is this CPI basket constructed? So in Kenya, it is derived from the KIHBS information. So KIHBS is the Kenya Integrated Household Budget Survey. So this is basically a survey conducted periodically that helps us to understand what is commonly purchased by households and their quantities. So the current Kenya urban CPI basket includes a total of 330 items. So this is not all of the things that are purchased by households, but these are the common things that are purchased by households. So it comprises of both goods and services. Then the steps that are used in selection of this basket, number 1 is selection of a representative basket. So household budget survey identifies the basket of goods that are commonly purchased by households. Then it considers consumption patterns, demographic and region variations. Then secondly, price collection. So we realize that trained price collectors collect prices for data prices for items in the basket by visiting various outlets, markets and service providers at regular intervals. So the intervals according to the KNBS is monthly, on a monthly basis. Then next, they do the weighting. So each item in the basket is assigned a weight that reflects its relative importance in household spending. So for instance, you'll realize that food expenses might have higher weight compared to entertainment expenses. Then they calculate the index. So using the collected prices and assigned weight, the KNBS calculate the CPI using the weighted average formula. So then next we have, they publish the data. So KNBS normally publish the data regularly, but on a monthly basis. Yeah, next. So after that, we want to understand what is included in this basket. So 1 and 12-month percentage change in the consumer price index. So from the slide, we are able to see in the first column, we are able to see there are 13 classification of individual consumption by purpose. So there are 13 divisions from food and non-alcoholic beverages all the way to personal care. So it includes both goods and services that are purchased by households. Then in the second column, where we have the weight, we're able to notice that food and non-alcoholic beverages have got a higher percentage of 32.9%, higher compared to the rest of the goods and the services that we're able to see. Then it is followed by housing, water, and electricity at 14.6%. So this shows that that the weight is too much on the food because many people spend so much on food compared to other goods and services. So this is basically because we understand that food is a basic need. And being a basic need, it is something that people cannot do without. And basically, we realize that food demand for food is inelastic. So you cannot substitute food for anything. You need to get food as an individual. So most households spend a significant portion of their income on food regardless of their income levels. Then we're able to notice that recreation, sports, and culture has the lowest percentage because this is now luxury. So most people do not spend on luxury. They'll rather spend on more essential than the luxury things. So what takes the least percentage is recreation, sports, and culture. Yeah, thank you. Next. So we want to see now, how is this data collected? How is this data collected? How does KNBS collect the data that they now come to a conclusion that this is what the households purchase and to what quantity? So they capture types of outlets where goods and services are purchased. So these outlets includes open air market, general shops, then supermarkets, specialized shops like butchery, chemists, and we realize that this data is collected on a monthly basis. Then informs selection of relevant outlets used in CPI data collections. Then in the data collected, it's also include guidelines for replacing outlets that close or relocate. So in case a market closes or relocates, there are guidelines that are help in replacing the outlets. Then CPI basket guides a selection of data collection zones. So we realize that at least 3 towns per basket, at least 3 towns or zones per basket based on the consumption expenditure. Then in the current CPI, we have 50 data zones selected, and we have 14 in Nairobi and 36 in other urban areas. And Nairobi is divided by income level. We have the lower income level, the middle, and the upper income level. So in Nairobi zones, the 14 zones are divided into 3. We have the lower and middle and the upper income levels. Then KNBS collects about 65,000 price observations from 6,600 outlets. So this shows how data collection is intense, and we really doubt if there's any other institution doing the same. So having 65,000 prices and 6,600 outlets, that data is so intense. Yeah. Next. Now we have seen how data is collected. We have come across the term CPI. So we want to see how CPI is calculated and how inflation rate is calculated using the formula in practical example. So how CPI is computed. So we see CPI is basically equals to the summation of the current prices of a basket of goods multiplied by the base year quantity, which is Q naught, then divide by summation of the base year prices multiplied by the quantity, the base year quantity. Then all of that you multiply by 100. Then that will give us the CPI. So let us know CPI is an index, so it does not have a unit. Then we have the inflation rate. Inflation rate, now you take the current CPI, you subtract previous CPI, divide by previous CPI, then times 100. So because it is a rate, it is measured, it is presented as a percentage. So if CPI is higher than 100, it shows that inflation has happened. And if it is less than 100, it shows that the prices or the inflation have reduced. So we are going to see in a practical example how we can apply the formula. So let's assume that in a basket of goods, of goods, we have goods and services. We have a loaf of bread, 1 liter of milk, and tray of eggs. So we are comparing two time period, that is 2024 and 2025. So 2024 will be our base year. Then we have 2025 as our current year. So as of 2024, let's assume the price of bread was at 50 shillings. Then 1 liter of milk at 100 shillings. Then 1 tray of eggs at 150 shillings. Then as of 2025, the same loaf of bread now costs 100 shillings. Then 1 liter of milk 150. Then 200 shillings for 1 tray of eggs. So in calculation, to get the CPI, so we have the total. The total for the base year is 300, and the total for our current year is 450. So using our formula that you have seen in our previous slide, we're able to notice that we take 450, which is now the total, the summation of the current year. Then you divide by 300, which is the summation of the price of the previous year, then multiply by 100. So our CPI is 150. So note that we are not assigned it a unit because it is an index. Then we have the inflation rate calculation. So for the inflation, we take the previous CPI. We take the current CPI minus the previous CPI, then divide by the previous CPI, then you multiply all of it by 100. So it is 450 minus 300 divided by 300 times 100. So we're able to notice that between 2024 to 2025, inflation rate increased by 50%. Yeah. Next. So we have seen how CPI, what inflation is, how CPI is calculated and computed. Now I want to see who is in charge of keeping inflation in check, because from our example, we're able to note that within that period of time, there was an increase in inflation. So we want to see who is in charge of keeping inflation in check. So we are able to realize that CBK has the core mandate under Section 4 and 4A of the Central Bank Act. It has the mandate of maintaining stability in the general price levels. So central bank, through the monetary policy decisions, aim to keep inflation low and stable over time. So this is basically achieved by either tightening or relaxing monetary policies. So when inflation is high, for example, it tightens the monetary policies. This is achieved by, for example, if, it increases the rates, the interest rates, so making borrowing expensive so that there's not so much flow of money within the economy. So when the inflation is a bit low, so it relaxes the monetary policy, and this is done by maybe reducing the interest rate or the borrowing rate so that people may borrow more, so that there may be circulation of money to maintain that stability. So this is done by a body which is the Monetary Policy Committee, which meets at least every 2 months. So it reviews data from CBK, departments, and other sources. Then it decides on whether to maintain or to adjust the policy stance. Then they usually have a target according to the monetary policy consultation clause, a target of 5% with a plus or minus 2.5. So the inflation rate should be between 2.5 to 7.5 to be considered stable within a period of time. So beyond that, then this committee will sit down and come up with policies to try to regulate it and bring it within that stance or that particular band. Next. So we have seen who is in charge. Now we want to see how are regional, question 5, how are regional baskets formed? From this, we are able to see that there are 10 baskets, Nairobi having 3, and the rest of the country or the rest of the regions having the remaining 7 baskets. So Nairobi has got 3. It has been divided into 3 different levels. As you can see on our slide, the first column, we're able to see the Nairobi basket is divided into 3. Nairobi lower income, Nairobi middle income, then Nairobi upper income. Then the remaining 7 represent Central all the way to Rift Valley region. So the expenditure we are using here is as of February 2016. That is the latest data that we have. Then we are able to notice that from the data, one question someone may ask is that why do we have different regions? Why don't they just use a specific area to come up with a conclusion? So the reason we are using the data is using different regions because different people have different level of income. So the level of income for someone in Nairobi is totally different from the level of income for someone in Rift Valley or even the Western region. So, and we are able to notice from our data, the last column of ratios, we're able to see that Nairobi has 41.57. It's a bit higher than the remaining. So this is basically because Nairobi is mostly urban. Then from our previous slide, we noticed that of the zones, Nairobi has got 14 zones that are 14 outlets that are being selected. So that contributes to that higher percentage. Out of the 50, Nairobi has got 14, which is nearly more than a third of the total area or the total selected zones. Then another thing, the reason why we're able to notice from the second column that Nairobi has got the highest expenditure. Like Nairobi lower income has got 499 billion. So when you consider that, we're able to understand that spending in Nairobi is a bit higher because it has got people with high income. So from there, we're able to notice that they are being differentiated, or the basket have been distributed so that it covers people from different areas with different income levels. And it has got 10 consumption bucket. Yeah. Then we want to understand what question 6, what are the different forms of inflation? What are the different forms of inflation? So we have 4 different forms of inflation, and this includes, we have the overall, or which other people call headline inflation. So this includes all items within the CPI baskets. So using it is the inflation that is calculated using the full CPI basket. Then we have the non-food and non-fuel inflation, which is computed by excluding food, transport, and energy components from the overall inflation. So it takes into account only those things that are non-food and non-fuel. Then core inflation, it excludes volatile items like food and energy to show underlying trends. So volatility basically means the degree of variation or fluctuation in prices of a given product. So we realize that food and energy has got are very volatile. Their prices do fluctuate over time. And this can be associated with factors like, for example, food. The reason why food is so volatile, it is an agricultural product, and we know that in Kenya, agricultural products are affected by season. For example, now you can bear witness with me. If you consider even the cost of tomatoes, because of the rains, the cost of tomatoes have risen because rains, to some extent, they do not aid in the growth of tomatoes. So we realize that food is seasonal, so it depends on seasons. Then another thing, some food items are imported. So they are subjected to interest rates and also the seasons of the country from which the foods are imported. Then for energy, we know that energy is a global product and it is imported. So it is affected by factors like political issues, wars, and exchange rate. So it fluctuates most of the times. So that's why food and energy are classified as volatile items. Then we have non-core inflation, which measures the price changes in volatile goods and services. So non-core basically measures only goods that are volatile, which is food and energy. Next slide. Now in this slide, we have the list. We are now being told the list of the non-core items. So the list varies. We have all the way from food, we have transport and energy. So it includes both goods and services. From maize. So if you are able to see through, we have a list of foods that are within the basket, and also a list of some energy that are within the basket. So I can see we have electricity, we have kerosene, we have petrol, we have diesel, then we also have water and other services as well. So that is basically just a list of non-core items, the volatile goods and services. Yeah. Next. Next. Okay. Now, next we want to know what are the trends in the annual average inflation. So we have seen the classification of the inflation, and we have also seen the definition of inflation, how it is computed. Now I want to see what has been the trend in Kenya, what has been the trend of the annual average inflation over a given period of time. So we have a time period between 2005 all the way to 2024. So we are able to notice from our graph or our chart, we're able to notice that the general trend, that is the dotted line, it has been decreasing over time. And so the general trend shows a decline in inflation from around 9.5 in 2005 to about 5 in 2024. So, and we are able to notice from the blue line, there have been inflation was high. If you look keenly, 2007, 2008, inflation was really high because of we realized that that was the time period that we were experiencing as a country, where we were experiencing social unrest, political instability. So this affected a number of people, some people losing their jobs, some people losing their homestead and livelihood, and others were displaced. Then we are also seeing that fluctuation in 2011, between 2011 and 2010 and 2011. This is associated with the drought that was experienced in the country during that time. We noticed earlier that agricultural product, food, which is an agricultural product, is highly affected by changes in weather. So during that time, the country was experiencing drought. So it led to high increase in the prices of food. Then what also contributed to that, there was also a high global oil price due to political instability in the oil producing countries. So that contributed to that high inflation rate between 2010 and 2011. Yeah, so at that moment, I'll now invite my colleague Maureen to continue to help us understand more about inflation. Thank you.
So we just go ahead from the previous charts that were showing the annual average inflation. And yeah, we've seen the trend in the annual average inflation. Inflation rates have been sort of decreasing, and the monetary policy has been trying to keep it at a decent level, at the target band between the 2.5 and the 7.5. But still, we've seen people taking it to the streets. In the first photo, it's taken from the East African magazine. That's a photo from March 2023, which shows a photo of people outside Parliament protesting because of unga prices and cooking oil prices, which were high. And yeah, the title of the article was Kenya's inflation climbs to 9.2% as some food prices soar. And we've had like several protests. Some of them were named the Unga Revolution due to the high food prices. And the culmination of all this was in 2024, where people took to the streets to protest against the increase in taxes through the proposed finance bill in 2024. That was in June 2024. And this picture is from the CNN World, where we see some police officers detaining a man during a demonstration over people killings during the finance bill. And people were feeling taxes are increased and we already have like maybe high food prices. Of course, people will, those are like the social effects of inflation. So moving forward, we'll just discuss question 8, which was if overall inflation is falling, why aren't households feeling the relief? Yes, the government has been saying the headline inflation, that's the overall inflation, which is in red, has been decreasing over the years, and it's also been at a decent level at the target band all through, except with some spikes around 2022 and 2023. So this data covers 4 years. This is 2020 all the way to 2024 across the 3 different forms of inflation. You have the core inflation, the non-core inflation, and the headline inflation. So the core and non-core inflation both add up to the headline inflation. So the headline inflation is the one in red, and the core inflation has always been below the headline inflation. But for the non-core inflation, which is the food and energy, yeah, those are the volatile goods in the CPI baskets, and they've been constantly above the overall inflation. And yeah, my colleague has already explained it's because of the currency issues, the global shock, and the global shocks that maybe disrupt the supply chain, and also just weather shocks that cause maybe food prices to increase, and also the imported inflation from the imported goods. So we can see here the non-core inflation, which is majorly from food prices going up and also energy prices going up, has constantly kept the non-core inflation above the headline inflation all through, and we'll explain this in a later slide. So if overall inflation is falling, why aren't households feeling the relief? Yeah, we are going to show this in relation to income levels. Just a reference to this slide number 14. Yes, the headline inflation is reducing, which is greatly related to the core inflation, which is reducing, because after people getting their income, of course, they'll pay the statutory payments. Then the disposable income that they have, they'll have to make choices either to buy food or buy the core items. And of course, food is a necessity, it's a basic need. So definitely they'll spend most of their income on buying food. And we see here in slide 15, that 8B, the changes in wage, employment, prices, and real earnings between 2019 and 2023. It's in percentages, and the inflation here is for June inflation, and it's using February 2019 as the base year, which is 100, and this is just this was computed using provisional data. So on the box area, we have inflation, and we have real average earnings. So we can see the June inflation has been increasing, and yeah, it has been increasing and also becoming moderate all the way from in 2019, it was 4.8. And then in 2023, it's 7.9. Then we can see the real average earnings. It has been shrinking from 2.7. It has gone to the left side of the number line. It's moving further away on the left side of the number line to negative 4.1. So it's constantly shrinking. So this table shows that inflation and income are moving in two different directions. So if inflation and income are moving into different directions, people are bound to feel to not feel the relief as much as the overall inflation is reducing. If much of their disposable income is used in purchase of food and food prices are increasing, so they won't feel the effect of the overall inflation decreasing, and also due to the volatility in food prices, like it's been mentioned, and the demand being inelastic. So people simply just have to buy food and they don't have a choice. And if their incomes are shrinking and inflation is sort of going up, like, they're going in different directions. So definitely they won't feel the relief as much as the government's data shows the overall inflation is decreasing. Then our question 9 was, is food price inflation the same as UNGA inflation? And using data from the previous slides on the basket of goods, as well as the list of non-core items. On the basket of goods, we have the 13 divisions that show different items that were used to compute the CPI. From the CPI basket, we have the food and non-alcoholic beverages, which carry the most dominant weight, that is the 32.9, compared to these other items. So what's contained, okay, for the division of food and alcoholic beverages, this is listed in the list of non-core items, and you can see here the different goods that are contained in the list of non-core items. We have the food products, we have water, and also products related to energy. So by saying is food price the same as UNGA inflation, when most people see the price of UNGA maybe shooting from, say, 100 shillings to 180 shillings, and conclude that inflation has gone up, maybe food price inflation has gone up by looking at maybe a single good or maybe 5 goods. So this is just to say that no, the food price inflation is not the same as UNGA inflation. Yeah, so the UNGA as one of the non-core items is the maize flour the loose maize flour. So the question on food price inflation being similar to UNGA inflation is no. The answer is no. Yeah. And the next question will be trying to answer, how do food and non-food prices compare? So when the consumer price index is computed, there's weights assigned to different food and non-food items. So looking at the food and non-food prices that are used to compute the CPI, if we compare the change in the relative food prices compared to the non-food prices with the base year of 2018 being our 100, that is December 2019, and we've computed the data all the way to 2025, March 2025, using the latest data. And from this, you can see food prices are volatile Yes, we mentioned that before because of and from this you can tell the change in relative food prices to non-food prices has gone up by at least 30. Yes, this is from 2018, from 100 all the way to, yeah, it's actually more than 30, all the way to like around 135. So by around, the change has gone up by around 35%. So this is just to show the relative food price shock that has been going on for so many years, such that we've seen protests related to UNGA, then we've seen major protest that was witnessed last year in June 2024, and it's been because of it's a problem that started long time ago with food prices constantly going up compared to the non-food prices. So this slide basically explains why do poor households face a higher inflation rate than richer ones. So yes, our question 11 just tries to explain why, yes, using data, why poor households face a higher inflation rate than richer ones. So from this, we collected data from the statistical abstracts in 2019 and also from the Kenya Integrated Budget Household Survey from 2015-16. From this, we see the largest share of household expenditure is just a decomposition of spending in Kenya for the calendar year 2019 on how people allocate their disposable income. So the largest share, the 44.8%, goes towards food and beverages. Then we have the 34.4% goes towards all other services that might be schooling, health, among other things, maybe insurance. Yes. Then we have all other goods, which comes third at 11.8%. Then we have housing, which is at 6.4%. And we have clothing and footwear, which is the least, and comes at 2.5%. So supposing we are comparing poor households and richer ones. So yeah, it's given that richer households have higher incomes compared to poor households. So if most of their income, like 44.8%, is going towards purchase of food, and if food prices are going up, so they'll have like less income to spend on other goods. So most of it will go towards food expenditure, and also they face high inflation rate because they don't have much flexibility in terms of expenditure for their disposable income. So they're bound to feel the pinch compared to richer households. And next, we'll be looking at the effects of pricing inflation. So here we have a list of five effects of pricing inflation. That is the reduced purchasing power. So for the reduced purchasing power, it basically explains if you have maybe say 100 shillings in 2024, and inflation was say 100. Yeah, it was 100 at that time, and inflation goes up by 5%, which is 105 in 2024, and maybe you want to purchase the same loaf of bread in 2025 that you purchased in 2024, you'll have maybe you'll have 99.5 shillings to purchase the same loaf of bread, or maybe you'll purchase a smaller quantity. So basically, inflation explains, for the same amount of money, you'll be able to purchase a less amount of the same good that you purchased the previous year. And it also makes it uncertain for investors to to invest, foreign investors and also local investors to put their money somewhere, because if you're not sure how, with the spikes in inflation, you're not sure how your returns will be. So perhaps you might choose to delay your investment or just not invest at all. So next we have the reduction in savings. So yes, borrowers and savers both respond to inflation rates. If interest rates are too high, people will, if the CBR rate is high, which translates to interest rates in most commercial banks, people will tend to borrow less and try to, they'll try to save their money so that they get better returns. And if interest rates are low, people will try to borrow more. So yes, raising inflation reduces savings. Then we have raising interest rates. Yes, if inflation is high, the monetary policy will try to tighten. The monetary policy. How do they tighten the monetary policy? They tighten the monetary policy by trying to increase interest rates. And if interest rates are increased, there'll be less borrowing, and this will reduce the money supply in the economy. Also, the other effect of raising inflation, inflation is a tax. This is a statement by Milton Friedman. He once stated that inflation is a tax without legislation. And how is inflation a tax? It's explained as more or less the same concept as reduced purchasing power. Yes, if you have maybe, we'll use the example of the same 100 shillings. And if inflation rates are high, that means there's some amount you'll have to either increase, or maybe you'll have to get maybe a reduced amount of the same good with the 100 shillings. So this is like you're being taxed silently without legislation or a vote. Then question 13 answers to how does the Central Bank of Kenya keep prices stable? So the Central Bank of Kenya, through the Monetary Policy Committee, keeps prices stable by setting the CBR rate. The CBR rate is like the base rate that the commercial banks can borrow from the central bank, and also translates to the rates that commercial banks set for credits by their clients in different commercial banks. So if inflation is high, the central bank may adjust interest rates to influence demand. And also if inflation is low, remember they're supposed to keep it at a stable band. That's the target band between 2.5 and 7.5. Yeah, the 5 and plus or minus 2.5. So it has to be at a stable band. It doesn't have to be lower than that or higher than that. So it's wrong to say, they're supposed to keep it low and stable. It's supposed to be just stable. It's not supposed to be too high or too low, because low inflation has its own economic consequences, the same way high inflation has its own consequences. The other tool that the Central Bank of Kenya uses to keep prices stable is the open market operations. And the open market operations is just an action by the Central Bank of Kenya by either selling or purchasing eligible securities to the public. So the government does this by selling the treasury bonds or treasury bills to the public to keep the prices stable. So if they want to reduce maybe the money supply in the economy, they'll try to they'll try to sell the bonds, and if they want to reduce the money supply, they'll buy the securities. Yes, and also the other tool that's used by the Central Bank of Kenya to keep the prices stable. And from the three, you can notice that it's just controlling the money supply in the economy. So the Central Bank of Kenya also keeps prices stable through reserve requirements. How do they manage reserve requirements? So all commercial banks are required by law to have a certain reserve requirements in the central bank. So if they want to reduce maybe the money supply to keep inflation stable, they'll increase the reserve requirements and also do the vice versa if they want to reduce increase the money supply in the economy. So that's how the Central Bank of Kenya manages to keep prices stable, not reduce inflation. Okay, not keep inflation low, or maybe, yeah. So for question 14, we were trying to answer, does the CPI measure the cost of living? Yeah, because there's a constant debate on, we hear most people say the cost of living has really gone up because, inflation rates are also going up. Do the two connect or rather relate? So there are two distinctions between the consumer price index and the cost of living index, which measures the cost of living, while the consumer price index measures inflation. It's a tool for measuring inflation. So for the consumer price index, it's computed from the supply side. So it's basically these outlets that, the different types of outlets, open air markets, stores, supermarkets, and all that. It's computed from the supply side, how are certain goods and services going for. And the difference between the CPI and the cost of living index, the cost of living index is computed from the demand side, from different households, farms, businesses, and governments. And the other difference is that the consumer price index relies on a fixed basket of goods and services, majorly related to consumption. So they keep it at consumption, the common goods that different households consume, both from the low income and high income. But on the other hand, the cost of living index includes prices of all goods and services that are not, even those not related to consumption. So we've seen just a list of the 13 divisions and also a list of non-core items. But the cost of living index might look even into choppers, the most expensive cars and all, just not consumption. It's endless. That's the end of my presentation.
Thanks a lot, Vivian and Maureen, for taking us through what inflation is all about, particularly Kenya. So thanks for that. If you like, this is more like a inflation 101 or an explain of inflation. And just to provide a quick summary before we jump into the Q&A session. So we've seen actually I didn't know you actually took each seven questions. So it was an equal split. Although I saw 8A and 8B for Maureen. But anyway, so Vivian has taken us through basics. I think you can see this was all sequential. Basics in terms of what inflation is. Of course, starting with the definition. And then obviously how it is measured and the data that is used. And often, obviously, this is done by Kenya National Bureau of Statistics. And she actually reiterated that from that, there are about 330 baskets of goods and services. And the way data is collected, you can see it's quite intense. No doubt, obviously, there is no other institution that does this. So that was quite elaborate. in terms of how it is measured, how CPI inflation is measured, and the data that is collected, the weighting of those different categories of goods and baskets, and so on. Then I think she concluded. Vivian concluded by, of course, there was this computation of CPI itself. He provided the list. And I think the last slide was just before. Yeah, so of course there was a demonstration. So I wanted to mention this demonstration of how CPI is computed. So that I think has made it easy for people to be able to follow. And then she concluded with the number 7 showing the overall inflation. The trend obviously has been downwards. Now, with this, what you can see on the screen, now getting into the practical bit of things, of course, people have been complaining. We hear that in the media quite a bit. Of course, it's discussed in the public arena, in social events, that yes, why is it that we are not feeling, why are households not feeling this decline in inflation? And I think Maureen has done a good job in trying to break that down. Because this is what is reported. And then, of course, the fact that we have inflation captured, actually, I think this is a new development by Kenya National Bureau of Statistics. They provide now information or measurements of inflation in terms of both core and non-core. Focus on the volatile products, goods, and food, and energy, versus the exclusion of those products, and then obviously the overall inflation. And you can see the trends. And then she used this to just basically explain why indeed that households are not necessarily feeling this relief. And you can, I mean, there was a slide that spoke specifically on the issue of the effect of inflation in terms of eating or eroding into people's households' incomes. And you can see, of course, there's that opposite direction between inflation for that period that is quoted there, 2019, 2023, and the real average earnings. So you can see the average earnings up there just before the boxed section, all positive. You can see by the 2023 they were negative because of the effect of inflation. And then, of course, provided further details on those specifically from an economics perspective, the various effects of inflation, and hence the reason why CBK is as one of the institutions, actually the key institution whose mandate is to ensure that we have stable prices through its monetary policy. And then she obviously provided a breakdown of how CBK keeps prices stable, the various tools that are used. So you can see them up there. And then obviously concluded by differentiating between CPI, or how CPI, the measure of CPI, and the cost of living index. Yes, so yes, thanks a lot again to the two speakers. As I mentioned, obviously, actually one of the reasons why the Popular Economics program was started was actually we had seen a swelling of these kind of questions that are maybe not answered by the other 5 programs within the IEA. And the creation of this program was specifically to address some of the questions that we get that are not necessarily aligned specifically to the objectives of the other 5 programs. Yeah, so I think I'll stop there and now open up the plenary session, or the Q&A question session. So I already see, let me first check whether we have I think, okay. So we'll start off. I see there's a hand raised, so feel free to raise your hand. So we'll start with Chris. So just introduce yourself and then pose your question, and you can be specific if you like to who you'd want that question to be. Who you'd want to respond to that question, either Vivian, Maureen, or even Kwame. Kwame with the program.
Curious to know, and also just in relations to Gabriel's question, how the government can cushion against inflation. And you've highlighted how monetary policy can be used for that to reduce inflation. But I'm keen to understand whether subsidies, and especially when we had a disruption in the supply chain and an increase in both an increase in inflation, both food and energy, having come from the drought and with the Russia-Ukraine war. So I'm curious to understand whether there's a way that subsidies can be used to reduce inflation, or whether they are intended to do that, and the ripple effect leads to a further increase in inflation. Thank you.
I would like to invite Kwame. You can please respond to Gabriel's and Barbara's. I hope you've also noted Barbara's question.
Yeah.
Yeah, those two. And then after that, maybe Maureen, you can read out, what's his name? Is it David or?
Chris Dominic.
Yeah, Chris's query, and then maybe respond to it.
All
Okay.
right. Okay.
And then we'll obviously open it up to another session, another round of.
Okay, John. So let me go first. So the question by Barbara is whether government can respond to curb inflation by by using subsidies. So let's make our concepts clear. Now, inflation is at the price change. And I think what you're asking is whether government should respond to the effect of inflation on vulnerable households. Because if inflation goes up beyond a certain band, as you said, Kenya's policy is that the band should be 5%, and then with a change of 2.5 percentage points on either side, which means in the eyes of Kenya's monetary policy authorities, inflation from 2.5% to 7.5% per year is not bad. It lies in the range that we accept should be managed. So that will not be a problem for the monetary policy authorities, because their objective is to keep it within that range. So we are not talking about, so if it is outside that range, then you can say they have failed to keep the monetary policy. They failed to have effective monetary policy, or at least keep within the targets. We could debate whether that 2.5 to 7.5 or 5 percentage point spread is big or small. And some people think it is big, some other people think it's decent. In our view, it's decent. So we actually think that view between 2.5 and 7% is okay. You heard, however, that the president mentioned last year that they even want to bring it back down to below 3%. For countries at Kenya's income level, that's unprecedented. It's actually bad policy, but nevertheless, the president mentioned that, and we have a problem with that because the Constitution and the Central Bank Act says the central bank is supposed to have monetary policy freedom in setting, or rather in chasing that target, but perhaps a preference by the executive and perhaps parliament would be a different conversation altogether. So let's come to the subsidy. So if we agree that we have to use a subsidy, because as Maureen and Vivian had persuaded us, or rather tried to persuade us, when inflation goes, just the headline inflation rate doesn't tell you everything. Low-income households are even more vulnerable because in national spending, 44% of the money that households spend is spent in buying food. Of course, that varies because there are certain households with higher incomes, therefore the food that they purchase would probably not take a big share of their income. But when inflation goes up, especially non-core inflation, which is food and fuel, which are very, very essential for people, then there's suffering that is inflicted by the fact that inflation is growing on those households. So one of the ways in which government can respond, as you say, is through subsidies. And that is responding to the fact that inflation has not kept within its target, or even if it's been kept into its targets, as Maureen has showed in a slide number I forgot, there's a relative price shock. In other words, as Maureen has shown, since 2018, this slide shows you that inflation has been on food, especially on food prices, which is 30% of the basket, 33% of the basket, has been growing higher at a far faster rate than the others. And the contradiction is this is happening while overall inflation or headline inflation has been on a 20-year downward trend. So in other words, this is what we call the relative food price shock. And we are not surprised. We are not surprised. This is different from saying that we like it, but we are not surprised that people were wearing sufurias on their heads and talking about unga inflation. Because while inflation was still within its target, the food inflation, which directly affects their budgets at home, was this high compared to the other goods. In other words, the prices of food over this 5-6 year period that we're talking about went up even 40% above what the prices for the other items, even rents and all the other things are. So this in itself shows you that there's a shock. We need to ask ourselves what's happening to food prices in Kenya, because that's an important thing to show. Can government respond by subsidies? Yes, it can, by choosing the specific vulnerable households and perhaps giving them subsidies. But subsidies on its own, Barbara, this is for you, should not be considered as the response to inflation. What we should be asking ourselves is, why is inflation on food or these items going up so high? Because that should be an admission that monetary policy has not been effective in preventing inflation and therefore impoverishing people. Governments respond to subsidies for people to purchase inflation in two conditions. One, when there's a relative food price shock, which we are showing is happening, and it tends to be, or rather should be temporary, to allow people to bridge that period as government responds to other policies to make sure that it is moderated. That's the first. The second is subsidies are a bad way, because subsidies simply means you are taxing the same people who are suffering from the fact that inflation has not been controlled, and then sending them money to deal with the emergency. So it's a suboptimal position. The optimal position would be government policy, as Maureen showed, should allow incomes to grow. In Kenya's case, the food price shock was worse because food prices are rising, even if the overall headline inflation is going down. But at that same time, while food prices are rising, incomes were actually shrinking. So that double wedge of food prices rising and income shrinking is part of the reason why the last 5 years have been particularly devastating in our view for household incomes. For households where a huge share of the income is spent to buy food, and especially for the lower and middle income households. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Kwame. So I hope, Barbara, your question is adequately answered. Kwame, have you responded to Gabriel's? I don't know really. Do I read it out again? Kwame? Has he left? Okay. Maureen, please read out Chris's question. I don't see it on the chat. I'm sorry, I don't know why.
Okay, it's on the Q&A section.
Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah.
Is there?
Okay.
Just read it out and then feel free to respond to it. I don't see it. I don't know where the Q&A section. Oh, it's okay. Q&A. You had let me see. I've seen it. I've seen it. Just 1 minute. Okay. So there. So I'll read them out. Then you can so that. So we have 2 questions from. Actually 3. From Chris. So when it comes to cost of government, the housing levy and increase in regulations, this does affect how prices of goods and services are priced in. But I was wondering if the CPI covers the cost of government. I suspect it doesn't cover it. Then the second part from Chris is, so he says, so lastly, would the best definition of inflation be the devaluation of currency, given it covers both supply chain disruption, cost of government and also the effect of new money from affecting particular prices in some areas like Ruaka, diplomatic zones, new money increasing the price of land, rent, etc. I think it provides another, just so that I conclude with Chris. Oh, sorry, he had an issue with his mic. So his question is just basically how they measure measure rent and healthcare prices. So he says, yeah, rent they use single rooms. So maybe so there's a mix of questions in terms of the measurement, what constitutes the elements in the CPI. Yeah. So it touches a bit on some of the things that Vivian had presented. So Maureen, would you like to take a stab?
Oh yeah, I'd like to respond to Dominic's question. He's asking whether the CPI covers the cost of government. Okay, in the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics definition, and they've given a breakdown on their data collection and how they computed everything. In the CPI basket they state it as commonly used household items. I didn't see the government bit, so I don't think it covers the government bit, and we've explained it, I think, in the last slide. Yeah, it's computed from the supply side, and it relies on a fixed basket of goods and services, the 330 items that are used from different outlets. So I don't think it covers the government majorly. And also the question on what will be the best definition of inflation. Yes, okay, he's saying, or rather suggesting that the best definition of inflation will be devaluation of currency, given it covers both supply chain disruption, costs of government, and also the effect of new money from affecting particular places in some areas like Ruaka, diplomatic zones. Yes, I'll just refer again to the presentation. Okay, currency devaluation is just an effect in inflation, either through imported inflation and also from the global shocks. But I don't think I'll say it's not the best definition of inflation. We'll just go with the CBK definition of inflation, which is the increase in general prices of goods and services over a period of time in a certain country or region. So the currency issue, devaluation or appreciation, is just an effect, a factor that contributes to inflation rather than a definition of inflation. Then the question on how do they measure rent and healthcare prices. Rent, they use single rooms. Okay, there's no explicit, okay, according to the research that we've conducted, there's no explicit breakdown on how which type of houses or rather dwelling they were using to compute. They've just produced the 13 divisions in the CPI basket, which is on this slide that I've projected here, that they were using to, they were assigning different weights according to maybe priority in expenditure for various disposable incomes. But they've not explicitly said we used a single room or a one bedroom. So it's just something maybe common across different households in either low income areas and high income areas. And also the question on Ruaka, the diplomatic zones. It was for the urban expenditures using the Kenya Integrated Housing and Budget Survey for 2015-16. they computed the regional baskets were formed across according to different incomes. Of course, they are cognizant of the fact that we have different incomes from low, middle, and upper incomes. So they were computing it according to the different income zones. So of course, the diplomatic zones fall under the upper income. So yeah, I think that answers your question. Yeah, and the question from Jairus on the chat box, on which form of inflation should we pay more attention to? Yeah, we have the three different forms of inflation. We have the headline inflation, which is the summation of core inflation and non-core inflation. So for the non-core inflation, which I think is something that we should pay attention to, given that non-core inflation includes food and energy prices, which are highly volatile goods, and also their demand is inelastic because in one way or another you need food or you need transportation to go somewhere. So I think and also the fact that they are highly inelastic, you need to spend on food. So if food prices are going up or maybe energy prices are going up, definitely it will affect maybe the flexibility in terms of expenditure to these other items. And with that, you'll definitely feel the pinch as much as the overall or headline inflation has been reducing over the 19 years that were shown. Yeah. Vivian can add anything.
Okay, thank you. I'll just add to that. Basically, if you look at question 8, I think it is slide 15. Yeah, the question is, if overall inflation is falling, why aren't households feeling the relief? So basically, it is important to note that all these three inflation are important, because if you just take the headline inflation and claim that inflation is falling, we are able to notice from the graph there that non-core inflation, which include food and volatile items like food and fuel, it is rising. It is above the inflation band. Remember, we noticed that the inflation band is between 2.5 to 7.5. So in as much as we may claim that headline inflation is reducing and it is below, it is between the bands, but the general inflation over time, it has been over until around October 2024, when it reduced to between the two bands. So all these inflation are important to consider, because if you take one leaving the other, then you may not interpret it really well. So they are all important to consider, because these are items that affect each other in a different way. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Yeah, so thanks, Vivian and Maureen. I hope they've responded to the questions that have been asked so far. So we have a second round, actually, final round of Q&A. So as both Maureen and Vivian prepare to make their final remarks, are there any other questions? Okay, since I don't see any in either the chat box or the Q&A, so I would like to invite both, so starting with Vivian. Vivian, you please take a minute or so to just give your final remarks and then pass it on to Maureen.
Okay, thank you. Just to wrap it up, one thing we need to note is that inflation in Kenya, it is not just about numbers going up. It is about how real people are affected when food, fuel, and other basic goods are more expensive. So we have seen how things like droughts, floods, the global oil prices play part in the pushing of prices. Like in 2011, we noticed that because of the drought, inflation was a bit high because food prices were high at that particular time. So someone may ask himself or herself that is therefore inflation a bad thing? So it is not a bad thing. Little inflation is actually normal and is good for a growing country or a growing economy. So it becomes a problem when it becomes higher. It gets higher above the expected band 7.5. So let us just not see the numbers, but let us consider how it affects the purchasing power, or how a real people are affected when these prices go up. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Vivian. Maureen?
Sorry. Okay, I'd like to say thank you to everyone who's attended, and I hope you've understood the concept on inflation, why it's important. It's important maybe in your salary negotiations, investments, savings. So you need to understand how the inflation numbers work and how it's important in your day-to-day life. I hope you've had a proper understanding of this. And if you have any more questions, please share them to the organization email, which was on the last slide. Yeah, we'll share it here. Yes, you can share more questions on inflations that you have. And yeah, thank you so much everyone for attending, and I hope you have a great afternoon. Thank you.
Okay. So thanks, Maureen and Vivian. So I would like to invite everyone to, or help me appreciate both the two speakers as well as Kwame. Thank you, guys. Yeah, so I believe this was quite useful in, at least as I mentioned, raising that literacy on the concept of inflation. And of course, as Maureen has mentioned, keep the questions coming. If you have any additional questions, keep them coming. You can share them through this email address, admin@iekenya.or.ke. Again, as I mentioned earlier, we will post the presentation in our website, so feel free to interact with it